All right. Hello, everyone. Everyone that is signed in, everyone that is calling in. I'm going to begin. I'm starting the History of Photography class. I'm ImaniHadden. This is a 9-week master course in which I'll talk about the history of photography as it has started from prehistory all the way to now. Even though it started in the 1800s, there's some sort of steps we've had before we've gotten to photography. Art existed way before photography. So we have to start with those times leading up to the 1800s, and then we'll continue on for the rest of the 9 weeks. So my background, I'm Imani Hadden. I received my Bachelor's of Fine Arts in 2018 in photography from Tulane University. I also hold an art history minor and an architecture minor. I'm currently a personal and public event photographer. I also do real estate, and I consider myself a visual artist. My contact information, my Instagram, my first name and last name, ImaniHadden. My link tree is there for other links, such as my electronic press kit. My email is imanihaddenphotography@gmail.com. I'm available for career building and mentorship for high school students in the Antelope Valley, which is the Lancaster and Palmdale regions. I'm also available for photo shoots that are commissioned. So my general Zoom meeting housekeeping rules, please stay muted with your screens off. I will unmute for questions at the end. There will be no homework, no note taking required, no testing. So pedagogy, the method and practice of teaching, especially as an academic subject or theoretical subject. Pedagogy is important because there's always a method to teaching. We cannot start wherever we feel like in the timeline of history. We must start at the beginning to understand how different elements of what we are learning interact with each other and how what we're presenting is different from the rest. So prehistory in the Paleolithic era. Many of us don't believe or we're led to believe that there was no creative intelligence in the ancient times, which is not true. These individuals use ochre and other mineral and plant-based dyes to make art on walls and to document what they see. So on the right, we see lions hunting bison in the Chauvet d'Arc in France. It takes a high level of intelligence in order to look at something, record it in your mind, take a tool and reproduce it on a wall, a piece of paper, or out in the world. So the prehistoric cave system was discovered by a child. Maria Sanz de Satula was a child of the archaeologist Sanz de Satula, and she discovered this cave system on her family's plot of land in Spain. As you can see, the bison were placed on the protrusions of the top of the cave. They were painted on, and they have remained there for thousands of years until she has discovered them in 1879. He was considered a fraud by the Catholic Church and by rival archaeologist Kathiak. They noted there was damp paint and no torch burns. They said, surely he had created this and he is a fraud. The Catholic Church challenged that he was supporting evolution and that he was saying that there was intelligent human life that predates biblical timeline. Throughout the years after Satula passed away, there have been newer findings of other caves in Europe and France, Germany, England, parts of the Netherlands, and deeper into Central Europe. So Cartiac, he published an official apology in the Journal of Anthropology in 1902, stating that Satula was correct in his findings and that there was notes made that because there was other cave systems found, it was improbable that he had painted the caves found on his family plot of land himself. Researchers as recently as 2021 have recreated prehistoric lighting systems using animal bone and marrow and fat. And they've noted that they burn longer and cleaner than burning torches with wood, hence why there was no soot marks on the ceiling. We're going to skip ahead to ancient Roman sculptures. So the ancient Romans and Greeks kept the 3D element by making sculptures of their leaders and people in the public from marble on the right and bronze on the left. So they were very highly skilled metallurgists. They also put their mythology into stone as a way to preserve it and keep their histories and their mythologies to be able to be taught in the next generations. And as we see that it has worked because we are viewing these sculptures today. Moving to the Middle Ages, they combined sculpture and painting. So this was a very key element because many people in the Middle Ages were illiterate, meaning they could not read. So craftsmen would create these altar pieces so that when they would listen to the clergy speak, they were able to visualize the parables being taught to them, and they were able to understand and have a closer connection with what they considered the divine. In the Renaissance, one of the most famous artists is Michelangelo, and he created paintings, drawings, and sculptures that worked to show how light either came from within the painting or drawing, or show the differences between the smooth parts, which reflected light, and the unmanipulated pieces of rock, which absorbed light. He's also most well known for his works David from 1501 to 1504 and the Sistine Chapel, which he took 4 years to paint from 1508 to 1512. The Baroque styles mimic the medieval and the Renaissance eras, but they combine sculpture and molding in order to show the churchgoers from above to show them that as they looked up, they were thinking about heaven, they were thinking about God and the divine. And so what they were being told was going into their ears, and their eyes could understand the symbolic connection from what the clergy was teaching them. As you see, where there is angels coming down from the heavens, the molding and the pieces of architecture are hidden because it is flat. So this is an illusionistic dome. The ceilings are actually barely concaved, but with the crown molding, the pieces of stucco, and the painting, you were able to see how the ceiling was very grand in this church, and it showed the parishioners that they were able to meditate on God and the divine. So the observation of light, a timeline. So sculpture, painting, and drawing used light and shadow to depict the medium, but photography was different because photography and the early stages of photographic experimentation used light in order to create the art itself. The earliest written documented case of light's behavior was made by Mosu in China. He noted the inverted and mirrored image that was later called the camera obscura. So as you see by the example, the glyph is shown entering the aperture or the small pinhole in the box. And on the inside, it is inverted and also shown from left to right, not right to left, or opposite of what our eyes would see in person. Greek philosopher a century later, Aristotle, found that similar phenomena was seen during an eclipse when he looked at the shadows of an eclipse through the trees' leaves. And Niels van der Berg showed something similar in his eclipse photography. In 1607, Kepler made the tent camera obscura for observing his astronomical applications. By this time, there was no tent obscura really in the world, but people were creating their own tent obscuras in order to look at the sky, to look at the stars. So many people had tent obscuras or camera obscuras by this time. Many people were experimenting with early camera optics. And in his book, he noted that by adding a lens and a mirror, it turned the images right side up and as our eyes see them. So this is an engraving from the 1700s of a camera obscura made by F. Guidot. Early chemical experimentation was made by the chemist Schultz, and he created the shadows on light-sensitive substrates such as paper, and he used silver nitrates and other chemical compounds that he noted made the pieces of paper and other substrates darken when exposed to the sun. But both methods of light reflection hadn't been combined until the two photo processes, daguerreotype made by Louis-Jacques Daguerre and the calotype made by William Henry Fox Talbot were invented. So Daguerre's daguerreotypes were one-of-a-kind images. They were detailed, they were recorded on a silver plate, and they were the first ever long-lasting and permanent photography developed. And during his time, the original exposure time was up to 15 to 20 minutes, but with experimenting with his chemistry, he was able to get the substrates and the silver nitrates to start developing within seconds. And on the right, here's his art, Boulevard du Temple in Paris. This is a daguerreotype he made in 1838, and it's believed to be the earliest photograph showing a living person. So if you can see my cursor, this individual here is maybe standing at a statue, a plaque on the boulevard. And you can clearly see the buildings, the boulevard, other buildings, trees, and other shrubbery. So it was highly detailed for photography at that time. Daguerre's pedagogy actually started with him painting and drawing with Charles Bouton. He made walk-in theater-sized dioramas in which him and Bouton put on light shows that showed the differences in the changing of light from day on the left to a night sequence on the right. He also simultaneously started a collaboration with Nietzsche. And Nietzsche was credited with making the first image ever. However, it did not last long, and he called it a heliotype because it took 8 hours to expose the image you see on the right on the plate that you see on the left. So that is a recreation of what was originally there. Unfortunately, it is faded because at that time, during Nietzsche's photo experimentation, he didn't quite have the chemistry down to make sure that the image stayed affixed to the metal plate. So Window at La Gras is actually the first image created ever. Talbot, on the other hand, made calotypes. These pieces were reproducible. They were on paper substrates, and they were actually most similar to the photography that we have today, such as the film strip that was put in the back of the camera. So who was published first? There was actually publishment of both of these men at the same time, just in different countries. So in 1839 in January, Daguerre got his daguerreotype patent and processed in the French Academy of Science. After Talbot had heard that he had published his work, Talbot had published his calotypes in the Royal Institute in London. So Talbot's calotype work was actually crisper and clearer, less grainy and muddled than the early daguerreotypes. This is because a type of substrate was used that was paper-based. And so the calotypes are warmer in tone. You see a light brown sepia color. Talbot focused on the English countryside and the gentry, so it's the upper classes. So as you see, a carriage and English architecture. On the right, he also made stamps using lace and substrate to show that the light passing through the lace and hitting the paper base behind it actually created shadows when he developed it with the wet chemistry. And the image on the left, calotypes were great for the portraiture being made. There was less blur being noted. There was blur, but there was less blur than compared to the daguerreotype. And his work rivaled the daguerreotype. However, the only issue was his patenting made it difficult for other people outside of England to get their hands on the calotype process. So daguerreotypomania swept across Europe. Everyone, thanks to the French government, was able to get their hands on the daguerreotype process. It spread across Europe. It spread across the ocean to the United States. So these are from the Met Museum. And people were making portraiture and keepsakes of their hands, their children, people that were living in the large cities such as Boston and New York City and Philadelphia were also making documentation of what the cities looked like in the time. To us, it's documentation, but to them, they were trying out this new photo series. So this was in the United States, made by Americans. So quickly, from 1839 to the 1860s, the daguerreotype process had traveled across the Atlantic Ocean into the major United States cities, and people were using it. On the left, there's a picture of Niagara Falls in its most pristine state before the guardrails were built up. People also traveled to the Midwest and out in the West and documented the Native American peoples. So John H. Fitzgibbon, who was an American, had a lot of imagery of First Nations chiefs and people as they lived in their land. And people also made images of what is now considered Old World Europe. So this is one of the first daguerreotypes ever taken in the United Kingdom. And it is Parliament Street from Trafalgar Square, which is a highly famous square today, highly developed with roads. And as you see, there's the standing pillar with the statue, but it is less developed than we see it today. So you can see the documentation process from the 1800s and look at the same cities now and see how they've stacked, grown, expanded with time. People also made keepsakes of their loved ones, and oftentimes being able to get your hand on a daguerreotype or a camera obscura that made daguerreotypes wasn't cheap and it wasn't easy. So photography then was for the upper classes, and many people were able to get their hands on these objects because they could afford to pay for the camera obscuras themselves. Okay, so taking a step back, did photography really make painting obsolete? I had queried that there was a death of painting. Originally, I had thought that photography had obliterated painting, but I don't think that is the case. Although photography was quicker, it preferred reality over fantasy. Novices had the ability to create it freely. There was necessary training, but it was not as extensive as painting, because painting, you had to have a mentor, and often your painting would have to develop from the time you were a youth until you were in your middle to old age. But the major difference that sets painting apart from photography is painting focuses on evoking mood. Photography focused on documentation. So we're going to compare the two images to the right. Elizabeth Louise Vigée-Lebrun is a female French painter. She had a client in which she was commissioned to paint. We have no knowledge of what the lady that commissioned this painting looked like. We can only rely on Lebrun's interpretation of what this lady looked like. Can we trust paintings? Maybe not as much as photography, but her painting and her portrait is nice to look at. On the right, there's a daguerreotype made of a young girl in the United States in the mid-1800s. You can see the gray daguerreotype quality that was sort of fuzzy, but yet her face, her body, her clothing, and the flower that she's holding, it does stand out. We can say that this girl on the right looked the way she was depicted. There was little to be hidden by the early photography experimentation. Paintings made during the highlights of photography's history. So this is Death of Sardanapalus. It is a romantic oriental oil painting made by Eugène Delacroix in 1827. So as you can see, the composition is very cluttered compared to the daguerreotypes, which usually have single people, 2, 3, maybe 4 at the most. You see bodies strewn all over the place. The use of color shows that there is a riot, there is passion, there is anger, there is a invasion coming from the outside into the frame, where daguerreotypes and even calotypes were very static, very quiet compositions, due to the fact that if you had moved during the exposure, you would come out as a blur. And often many daguerreotypes that are seen as throwaways have people blinking so their eyes are blurred. Babies turn their head so the baby is blurred in the composition or in the family portrait. But in painting, you can capture an instant, but still show that there is movement and there is energy within the frame. Also, the major difference is this was not a traditional piece. It was not in a church. It did not make people think about God, and it was not ancient mythology. The next image, Notch of the White Mountains. So this genre of painting really showed the idyllic, which focused on non-dangerous, non-threatening landscapes, as compared to the daguerreotypes of people in the city. People gravitated back towards the idyllic style of painting when they didn't want to think about modernity, the bustling cities that they're often trying to get away from and go on long stays into the countryside. So this idyllic form or genre of painting really spoke to the upper classes and the bourgeoisie, who could actually afford to go out for long periods of time in the countryside and escape the newly developing cities in the West. And The Desperate Man by Gustave Courbet. So this image, based on the use of color, light from within the portrait, and shadow, really shows a difference in capturing expression. With daguerreotypes, you may notice that everyone has a straight, serious face. That was because the exposure times were up to 30 seconds to a minute before chemistry allowed the exposure time to be a few seconds. So it was up to 1 minute of holding still. For this self-portrait by Courbet, he was able to express his madness by drawing you towards his face, his eyes. You were fixed in on his body language. Where in daguerreotypes, everyone was static, everyone was posed in a certain way. It was very stiff, as we would call it today, but that was the early photography, where painting continued to be expressive or not expressive in the example of the idyllic paintings compared to photography. So one advantage of the discovery of the photographic art will be that it will enable us to introduce into our pictures a multitude of minute details which add to the truth and reality of the representation, but which no artist would take the trouble to faithfully copy from nature. So that was when William Henry Fox Talbot, the maker of the calotype. And I do agree with this comment, because painters often omitted the ugly, the flaws. They made people look more heroic, more beautiful, more stately than they looked in real life. Where photography, they wouldn't be able to hide any flaws that they had. It'd be extremely difficult if you were not attractive by society standards and have a portrait made of yourself and have that passed around and say, oh no, that's not what I look like, when your portrait or your daguerreotype, your calotype looks exactly the way your face and body look in person. It's very interesting to think about. So daguerreotypes or tintypes today, when I was at Tulane University in my first year, I met David, our mentor. He is an artist. He has an art and a bit of an architecture background. And the first time I was able to see the tintype or daguerreotype process in person was when he made Don't Break the X-Acto Knife. And it was on show from November 3rd to December 13th, 2014. And there is an installation video both in the Ogden Museum in Louisiana, in New Orleans. And then here is the installation that I had witnessed in my first year of architecture school. That is the staircase, and up to the sides were where the next levels of classrooms started. So he put it on the critique wall. So he's bringing art into the architecture world. And that was a very interesting crossover for me. I had never seen anything like that before, because art remained art, architecture remained architecture, but he made tintypes of the upper level architecture students, and they came out so beautifully. You see how the process, when he had exposed them, some of them came out black on the edges. There's light from the light source streaming in. Some of them have cracks. Some of them have slashes across the face. So this is the natural process of when you're creating an image. Sometimes it's overexposed, like this lady's face. Sometimes it has pieces that are underexposed to the light. And so it catches a lot of the silver nitrates and it clumps them into a darkened shadow. But overall, his work is really amazing. It was a joy to see it in person. It was a joy to get to meet him. I'm gonna move to the next piece. And so here's some of the process imagery. He's sealing the tintype with a sort of lacquer to keep the tintype from continuing to develop into a pure black square. So these processes were very extensive. The early era of photography was very, 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 very hard to get what we consider perfect today. And here is David, our mentor, taking a picture of an upper level architecture student in the studio. So he's covered himself in the camera obscura. He has his light source, which is a modern light source, but was similar to the light source in which a bright flash was set off quickly before the image and the shutter was taken back then. And to give you some more information on him, he's a Gulf Coast born artist. He's been active since 2002. He received his Bachelor's of Arts in Louisiana State University, and he's the founder of St. Veronica's Photography in New Orleans, and it's an art consulting firm. So the goal of his work is to make sure that artwork gets out into the city. Each piece is custom made and is site specific. So if there is a park, there will be things that relate to the outside, maybe leaves, maybe flowers, grass. So there's elements of where he puts the art in the actual sites that he puts the art itself. It is very architectural in its execution now that I think about it. And he goes for vocational specific areas. He's getting out of the art world, he's getting out of the gallery, and he's getting out into the public sphere. And here's his contact information, his website, his Instagram. Give him a follow. Check him out at the Ogden Museum in New Orleans, Louisiana. There's articles on him. And there is the St. Veronica's Photography website for you to look at. So take a screenshot or remember David, our mentor. And here's my many sources. I casually glimpsed and took pieces of what I needed from various places, the Met Museum, chemistry websites, art history timeline sites, information about how to make a camera obscura, Michelangelo's many works, on and on. And next week, we are going to be recalling European antiquity, so the ancient Roman times, and observing the foreign exotic. And it's the early origins of visual stereotyping. So this is a European colonial travel era from the 1800s to the 1900s. And my work, I like to do portraiture. I attend many events in Los Angeles, as well as the Antelope Valley area. I love the way people decorate themselves, no matter where they come from. And this gentleman comes from Oceanside, as you see from his tattoo on his neck. And he's always talking about Oceanside. So the placement of that tattoo just makes a lot of sense. I enjoy car photography. I love the way the car as an art piece functions, whether it's in the showroom or outside. And I go outside to public events where there are musicians, locals that will pose for me. I always love getting out there, talking to people, seeing different things, seeing different elements of the city that I'm from in Los Angeles, but from a different point of view. I also love working with models. I was an America's Next Top Model fan when it was in its heyday, and being able to pose someone in the best way possible in order for an image like this to come out, it is really fulfilling as a photographer to get your ideas to come out through your images. So I'm going to ask people to unmute themselves for questions. If anyone has any questions, Fiona P has raised her hand. Go on, Fiona.
Hi, so I just wanted to ask, you mentioned one time that only the upper class were able to take photography because of the materials needed to, develop the photos. So I just wanted to ask what happened during the time of when it was only upper class to everyone being able to take their photograph during the Victorian era. Like, for example, like death photography.
Mhm.
Seems like everybody was able to um, take that type of photography, and then it died down. So I was just wondering, like, is there a correlation in being in photography being accessible to the masses, that it was people could do that and they started taking pictures of anything they could? Like, what do you feel like contributed to that part of photography, of death photography, and how it became accessible to the large masses?
I think as the daguerreotype process became more refined, the types of chemicals being used were, they were still very toxic, but they were also more available in the public spheres. And as things become more available, people get their hands on them. The process remains the same, but the materials themselves are more refined, less archaic in a way. The chemical compounds are finer, better. And so when there was a shift in the quality of the materials, it was better able to be put out into society. Because now, instead of getting, let's say, a few ounces of silver nitrate, you were able to get your hands on maybe the powdered liquid came maybe like half a pound, quarter of a pound. And so as things became more plentiful, they are able to go further out in society. And I really think that people really needed and wanted to preserve the images, such as death photography, because once you bury the person, sad to say, but it is the reality, they are gone. You have your internal memories, but once you get older, your mind fades. What they look like while it's in your memory, it is not very set, it is not very clear. But if you were able to say, this is an image of your great 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 grandfather, this is what he looked like, here's where he's buried, but this is his image. It really did something for the later eras, for them to be able to preserve the likenesses before in life and even in after death. So that was a great question.
Thank you. I have another question, just really.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like, do you personally feel like, with how much progress photography has become as an art medium, that people are trying to bring back painting?
Yes, 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 yes. There's many people that even today, they don't necessarily see the need to take as many pictures. It's become just so overladen with TV, movies, people taking pictures of their food and posting it on social media, the constant never-ending scroll of social media, that people are looking to more quieter mediums to master: painting, engraving, lithograph, drawing, um, this slower, more gentle and peaceful mediums of art. Yeah, I do think that people are going in a way, going back, regressing to different mediums that we're not really taught to do anymore. Many people aren't taught to paint. I wasn't taught to paint. I picked up paint and I painted some things, but like the act of being put into a level of painting pedagogy from their art history all the way to now, um, people are looking towards that. People are really trying to get back into that, studying painting, art history of painting. Even I consider graffiti painting. Some people would argue with me, no, it's not, Imani. Graffiti is not art, graffiti is not painting, but it is painting to me. People have been painting, people are going to continue to want to paint and to create in that medium, because I think people are oversaturated with photography. But that's my opinion. As much as I love photography, it is everywhere. And when something is everywhere, it is nowhere. It's just so much. So yeah,
Okay.
very good questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. I noticed that you had commented how when the art piece is painted versus in a photo format, you really can't hide the true image of the person in a photo. But if you're drawing someone and they may not look quite how you would like them to look, you can change that with paint. Whereas when you take a photo, you're going to get a truer image.
Mhm.
So is that something that you're seeing, where when people are doing photos, they really can't hide? You can't really clean up per se a
Mhm.
photo of someone, whereas you can clean up a painting. So what's your thought on how that is shaping photo?
Well, up to a certain point, and I know I'm taking you back forward to where photography is now, where face filters exist. I can have a full face of makeup on Instagram and you would never know I'm sitting barefaced in my PJs laying in bed somewhere. So there's the technology has really, today the technology with Photoshop and Lightroom, other levels of photography and editing software have made photography the way paintings used to be. And that question really makes me think about how much editing and filters and software and airbrushing happens for images today that make me go, well, how is this different than what LeBron was doing to her female client, right? So up until a certain point where people stopped using film and started getting into digital, like more digital in the, I was just say like 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and beyond. Back when it was film, it was still very honest and genuine, in my opinion. When people were loading film into backs of cameras, taking pictures. And so we have a very skewed idea of what is attractive or beautiful or well done or done up, very much similar to back in the day when portrait painting was the way you got your picture out. And a fine example, in the medieval times, King Henry VIII was looking for yet another wife. This man had many wives, but he was given a picture of the German noblewoman Anne of Cleves. And by picture, I mean painting, excuse me. A painting of Anne of Cleves. And he said, bring her to me. She is so beautiful. She arrives from Germany and England, and he goes, my God, she looks like a horse. Terrible, terrible thing to say to somebody, but the portrait and the portraitist that made it was called into question of, are you trying to deceive me? Why are you making this woman look like someone that she does not? And so, yes, it was a thing. It was a thing, and now it's becoming a thing with images today, but more like people are just wanting to rid themselves of acne rather than fool a possible suitor into marrying them because they wish to have a husband. So, the reasoning between people editing their photos now and people editing or getting portraitists to edit their paintings back then are different, but the photography I'm starting to see it is operating the way painting did back then. And it's strange to me as I don't do much editing on my my images personally of people's faces. I leave their face as their face is, their body as their body is. But I do see photography starting to mimic painting in that regard, and it is very strange to me that people are heavily manipulating the photos. So yeah, that's a good question. Any other questions from you or anyone else? Any more questions?
So your background is in photography, but you clearly know art history. So what's your background in art history as well? Because you seem clearly familiar with the history of art as it comes towards photography. I missed your opening comment, so I'm assuming you also have a background in art history as well?
Yes, I have a minor from Tulane University in art history. That wasn't my plan, going from architecture major to an art major. It just sort of happened as I needed more art history classes that I decided, okay, I can load myself up with more studio classes where I'm making the art, or I can load up on the academic reading, writing, presenting side of the art major, which is the art history. So I took a class in Michelangelo's paintings from Leslie Geddes. I took one in the paintings of the countryside and how paintings represented status and class, even though we just see them as paintings. I took a Black art history class from Mia Badgeneris, which will come in handy in the next following series. So I've started with just the basics from the prehistory. I've done all the painting from prehistory to painters now. Unfortunately, there wasn't one solely dedicated to photography. I miss that. I'm very attracted to making this series because in my education, that's what I wanted to see. They talked about lithographs and engravings and architecture, of the Byzantine and medieval eras. So I got some of that from both majors, but never photography. So I thought, let's see what we can get out of a series in just photography. Yes, it's going to reference movies, when the moving pictures come in the 20s and 30s, the talkies come in the 30s and 40s, video, film, those will start to enmesh themselves as slightly different spin-offs of photography. But yeah, my background, I have an art history minor, and I loved every moment of taking those classes. I wouldn't be a curational studies or an art history major, but it really did enrich my educational experience. I love art history.
Okay, so you have a bachelor's degree in photography?
Yes. Fine arts, bachelor's of fine arts in
perfect.
photography. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions about me, the content, the series?
I have a question. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. So, forgive me if you answered this in part of the earlier question, but as you know, as photography and daguerreotypes and the tropes became like patented and everything, even though photography still was making its way and being like not as accessible still, was there a shift in painting as being more accessible to different apprentices, or was it still sort of a more middle to upper class type of work, besides the regular aspiring everyday person? But was there a shift at all of what was becoming more accessible, and where that sort of fell in terms of artwork in the class, social and class structure?
Yeah, I from what I learned and some of the information I've swept over in my research, that painting still up into maybe the early 1900s was very much class-based. So like getting a painting education from a mentor that your elders, parents, grandparents have hired for you, it was still very much a upper class thing. However, having access to paints itself was pretty accessible, but it was more like the training of like the fine art painting that you would get at an academy or one-on-one mentorship was still very upper class. Two people have raised their hand. So did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to make sure I answered your question. I can't.
Hi, Imani.
Yes. Hi.
Can
Hello.
you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Okay, I don't have a question. I just had a comment. This
Yes.
is Joy. I absolutely love your presentation.
Thank you.
I think that it was thorough. It showed from the beginning till today.
Mhm.
I saw your curriculum for your
Mhm.
master class,
Mhm.
history master class. I almost feel like it could be called art and photography history, although I know you're
Yes.
leaning towards photography because of it starting from art and then of course going to photography. But I just wanted to comment on the beautiful job
Thank
that
you.
you've done. I would love to see this on YouTube.
Yes.
Because one of the popular topics that people love to watch is history.
Yes.
History on anything.
Mhm.
And so maybe we could talk about that. I'd love to put this on my channel, my Petri Magazine channel. That would
Okay,
be
yeah.
phenomenal if you allow. But then again, I know that you're recording this and some
Yes.
of the numbers are showing up. So maybe if somehow we could work not having those show. But I would love to see more people hear this and see this presentation that you have. That is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And then I'd love to invite, and I will, more people.
Okay,
to your
yes, thank
following
you.
course.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Appreciate everyone that is called in. There's a call-in number. Everyone that has joined, everyone that is sitting with someone in a room. So thank you for coming to my first one. Someone else had a hand raised. I can see the hello. Who had their hand raised? Someone
So
else?
my question is, as you move along, you're going to bring us from the pre, and then you're going to take us through to current 2020s, right? So we're
Yes.
going to come with you on your journey
Yes.
through time. Is that what we're doing?
Yes. Yes. So every week will be
Perfect.
a different chunk of maybe 10 to 20, 30 years, like large chunks, because the daguerreotype stayed around until the early 1900s, but what was being photographed and documented changed. So I will talk about a lot of societal shifts from back in the old times, as we call them, to the more modern eras that we are familiar with, such as the 50s, 60s, 70s, which seem to, at least most people have gotten some sort of historic background from either knowing the presidents at the time, or the music of the time, or the fashion of the time. So as we get towards more of the contemporary times we're in today, you'll start to see things of like, oh, I know what that is. I know about that time. Oh, I remember when, if you lived during that time, if you were a child or an adult during that time. So it's going to be different every week, and it's going to be building on the fact that it was photography from back then to the shifts in society and how photography has walked along that journey through the shifts that we've seen throughout, wow, 150 plus years. It's been 150, 100, yes. Yeah, over 150 years of photography. That's pretty insane. How photography is used to document, sometimes subvert, sometimes to bring things to light in a way that we haven't seen before. Because there's this concept today of like pixel, it didn't happen. We're relying on that photographic evidence often to decide whether or not something is credible, which I find to be very, very interesting how we use photography as a crutch and we don't even know it. Like if photography disappeared tomorrow, wow. There's no more YouTube. There's no more TV and other photographic mediums that have split. So yeah, I will bring it from the older times to the introduction of various other splinter photo mediums. Consider TV a photo medium, consider the internet, things with screens as photo light. It's artificial light, but it's still light, photo and light mediums. So yeah, it's going to be a full timeline. Any other questions? Oh, thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, I just had another quick one.
Yeah.
As we're moving, as you're moving through the timeline and everything, will you give, I guess, some of the scientific background or a little bit with like the changing of photochemicals and everything used, which ones they realized were a little more dangerous, and stuff like that? Will you kind of just briefly mention those at all, or are we going to sort of move closer towards technique and other social movements and things?
I will still focus on the chemicals, the scientific. I'll still have some scientific background because there was some scientific changes, but many people could many people really didn't care as long as an image was an image, but the scientific aspect is still important to me. So I will remain with that when I do find in the scientific chemistry background, if there's anything that really starts being very different. But the chemical compounds were very much similar, except for like maybe the paper used, dipping things in salt versus other chemicals. So slight changes, but I will still keep with the science aspect as it comes up. Thank you for asking.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. I'm really interested in like the chemical composition and like the physics and optics in general. And I know photography is older, but it's still a somewhat newer technology. So it makes sense that it hasn't changed a whole lot.
Yeah.
I guess.
We're
Thank
still
you.
in the early stages. Thank you. Marilyn, you raised your hand. You have a question.
Oh, that was it. Thank
I'm
you.
sorry. Oh, okay.
It's okay.
Perfect.
It's the computer delay.
Oh yeah, okay. Anybody else? Okay. So I'm going to go back to my contact information. I'm ImaniHadden Photography. Follow me on Instagram. Share my page with people. Email me if you are interested in a commission photo shoot, or if you want me to talk to your high schoolers or youth about career building in photography, personal mentorship. I'm making myself available, as it has been difficult wanting to be a photographer in high school, but having to change my high school exit class for my career to architecture because it was more easily available. So I want to make myself available for anyone that is interested in photography. Before we go, any more questions about anything? Let me see my participants. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Everyone that is called in, everyone that has raised their hand, contributed information, contributed questions. I appreciate all of you. Thank you for your time, and show up next Wednesday, 6 p.m. We're going to have a whole different set of history. So thank you very much, everyone.